Coming up on Saturday at Belmont Park, it is the $1.5 million Belmont Stakes, the third jewel in racing's Triple Crown. And to break it down, Joe Kristufek joined by Scott Shapiro. And Scott, this Belmont, a little bit different than some years past, but also very similar at the same time.
Yeah, Joe, I thought this came up as strong as we could expect, especially without a Triple Crown on the line. And Mage obviously skipping this after the third place effort in the Preakness. Would have liked to have seen two fills, but understandable why Larry Ravelli might not think that horse is a 1.5-mile animal, or might just want to take advantage of the Ohio Derby situation. But I thought this race came up pretty fun. And the pace of the race, I think, at first I thought might not be all that honest, but then National Treasure enters the picture. You've got Tapit Shoes along the inside, who's an improving horse. They're not going to go uber fast by any stretch of the imagination, but I think the closer should have an honest pace to run at.
Yeah, Scott, I agree. I think the real wild card in here is this Il Miracolo horse who looks to be outclassed on paper, but last time out he went a one-turn mile at Gulfstream, gate to wire 45-1 to the opening half, showing speed out of nowhere. I mean, how do you even evaluate this horse? And if he does run to those type of fractions in the Belmont, then there's going to be a more than honest pace.
Well, it was the second time he wore blinkers, Joe. The first time he broke inward, so maybe that's part of it. The equipment change and a good break led to the speed, but he might get seriously outclassed, and that speed might not show up at all. That being said, he does have a chance to add to the mix, and if I was sending the Son of Gun Runner out, I would be sending. That's his only chance to be competitive.
Tapit has been a major factor in the Belmont. His progeny has won 4 of the last 9 editions: Creator, Tonalist, Tapit, and most recently Essential Quality. You've got 2 horses sired by Tapit in this race, Scott, and 4 horses who are out of Tapit mares. Tapit has never won the Kentucky Derby as a sire, but man, he has put his stamp on the Belmont.
Yeah, it's interesting. And, I know it's still a small sample size, but it's pretty significant amount of his progeny have done well here. So there's got to be at least something to it. That being said, the Tapit that is given the biggest chance here in Tapit Trice, we can get into him, Joe. He definitely makes sense. He's been people's Belmont horse since way before the Kentucky Derby. And I get it. I mean, he has that kind of stride and whatnot, but as the favorite or the second choice after that Derby where he was in the same spot basically as Mage and Angel of Empire with that big setup, and he was completely underwhelming. So I'm not totally against Tapit Trice, but I don't fully get one to back him at 5-2, 3-1 at the most.
I don't trust him either. I mean, Pletcher's been great in the Belmont. We know that. He's had 4 Belmont winners, Bodonigal last year. He's got Tapit Trice. He's also got Forte, who was going to be the favorite in the Kentucky Derby. Well documented that he had some foot problems going in, had to be scratched, pointed to the Belmont. We're talking about a son of violence. We were skeptical maybe about him being able to go 1.25 miles, and now he's got to go 1.5 miles off of a layoff. We haven't seen him since the Florida Derby.
What a long, winding road it's been, Joe. It feels like yesterday when we were talking about wanting to beat Forte in the Derby. Haven't seen him since then. Obviously, the interesting, it's hard for us to know how significant any sort of injury he had was, and we know he was scratched. He's just another horse that, given the price, is just hard for me to get excited about. Forte, Tapit Trice, both of the Pletcher runners certainly have major chances, but from my perspective, I think they're underlays. What about you?
Yeah, I'm against both of them. I don't have either one of them in my top 3, and they're not going to factor into my betting strategies. The horses that are trained by Brad Cox, Scott, and obviously Essential Quality, a Belmont winner from that barn. He's got Angel of Empire, who I know was your pick in the Kentucky Derby. He gave you a run for your money. He finished 3rd that particular day, was simply outfinished by Mage. 2 fills got the jump on him, so to speak. Now, interestingly enough, going 1.5 miles, Flavien Prat after the Kentucky Derby suggests to Brad Cox that maybe this horse needs blinkers. I don't know if he wants to try to get him into the race a little bit earlier, because it doesn't look like this horse doesn't want to pass in the stretch. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting, the equipment change. I'm hopeful it's for the reason that you mentioned, getting him into the race a little more, because while he has proven he can come from way out of it and get the job done like he did in the Risen Star and in the Derby to an extent where he had absolutely no excuse, and like you said, was just out finished by a better horse that day in Mage. But that effort in the Arkansas Derby was the one that led me to him in the Kentucky Derby, where he showed a little bit more early speed. He wasn't up and on the pace or anything, but he got the jump on late running sorts. And I think that's going to be the trip you want if you're backing Angel of Empire in here. Don't love seeing an equipment change before one of the bigger races in a horse's career, but I'm hopeful Brad Cox knows what's going on with this horse, Flavian Pratt as well, and this horse sits a nice mid-pack trip instead of coming from last to first.
It was Flavian's suggestion to put the blinkers on that kind of led me to Angel of Empire as my top pick in this race, Scott. But I think the other Brad Cox horse might be the value play in Hit Show, who did make a threatening move in the Kentucky Derby. Brad has said publicly he expects his horse to go forward with Manny Franco. He's going to get a jump on a lot of the horses that'll be rallying from off the pace. And his Kentucky Derby was pretty good. He was wide throughout. He was wider on the turn. And at the quarter pole, you're like, man, this horse got a chance to win. He flattened out a little bit in the stretch. I don't know if he's a mile and a half horse or not.
Yeah, that's a big question. He's done very little wrong in his career. And given the rail draw in the Derby, I know he was wide during the middle to later part of the race, but that trip worked out pretty good for him from the inside. I know we talk about the inside, getting the rail in the Derby, but the way it shakes out sometimes, the rail can be a good spot. Now, he was tired in the lane, was caught a little wide towards the latter part. I think I agree with you. If you're looking for, outside the top 3 or 4 horses, he would be the one I'd lean on. He's done very little wrong. It'll be interesting to see what kind of trip he gets in here. Like you said, Brad talking about him being forward to an extent, that might be the right trip in this spot.
Speaking of forward, National Treasure won a very watered down edition of the Preakness with the Kentucky Derby winner, not quite as good tactically as he was the first Saturday in May, coming back on short rest, et cetera, et cetera. National Treasure for or against here?
I'm against. I think the Preakness was a cut below, if not 2 cuts below this field, in the Derby field with the Tapit, Forte, Angel of Empire, even the Hit Show, and a few other Archangelo, who we can talk about in a second. So I'm against National Treasure, but I do think Archangelo is a little bit intriguing. How about you?
Yeah, no, I do too. Improving sort by Arrogate. The horse only cost $35,000 as a Keeneland September yearling. Would love to see Jenna Antonucci do well with this upstart individual who ran well, going 1.1 miles at this racetrack at Belmont, and seemingly trains like a horse that's ready to run all day. So that would be a horse I'm a little bit intrigued by of the non-household names.
Yeah, me too. This is a race where I think I'm going to try to get live in horizontal wagers to Angel of Empire, Hit Show, and Archangelo. I think that's the play. I may consider Tapit Trice in there in a defensive use. Forte, I'll take a chance against. Fun rendition of this race, Joe. I think it came up pretty solid, especially compared to what we got to see in the Preakness. No offense to the second leg of the Triple Crown.
Scott, it seems like we're on the same trifecta, maybe in the exact same order, both with Angel of Empire on top.
Yes, and I'll probably be placing a win bet, and that's because TwinSpires money back offer is back at you Friday and Saturday. Every eligible race at Belmont Park. Get up to $10 back on your win bet if your horse finishes second or third. As always, go to the TwinSpires.com offers page or on the app under the offers tab, and make sure you opt in before getting involved.
The $1.5 million Belmont Stakes goes off as race number 12 on a sensational Belmont Day card at Belmont Park. And don't forget to play the races on TwinSpires. The place to play, the place to win.